Welcome back to the podcast.
We have a great show for you today.
Welcome to the debate. Imagine this. You are like 5 minutes away from stepping into the most important professional presentation of your entire career.
Ugh, stressful already.
Right? Your notes are organized, your slides are loaded, and you actually feel ready. And then your phone buzzes. You glance down and you see a 2-word text message from your boss.
Never a good sign.
Exactly. And it is highly critical and incredibly vague. Suddenly, your heart rate just spikes. Do you let that surge of anxiety completely hijack your performance and, derail your entire day? Or do you have a mechanism to basically lock that emotion in a mental box until 5 p.m.?
A mental box. Right.
Today, we are exploring the optimal psychological framework for managing our very human, very messy emotions while we are in the relentless pursuit of long-term goals.
And, it is a fascinating area to explore, mainly because human emotions fundamentally resist being managed. They do not want to be put in a box.
Well, they might not want to.
No, seriously, we are diving into a specific paradigm from our source material today that proposes this very structured, almost mechanical solution to what is a profoundly messy biological reality.
Yes, and the central thesis we are examining today suggests that in the journey of life, your long-term goals, they must be the ones driving the car. Your emotions, they are absolutely allowed to come along for the ride.
Oh, how generous.
They get to sit right there in the passenger seat. But, and this is key, they must be wearing a seatbelt, and they never, under any circumstances, get to touch the steering wheel. So I defend this highly structured, compartmentalized approach to emotional regulation because, I see it as a deeply pragmatic, empowering roadmap for building true resilience.
Well, I question whether this framework's, persistent demand for relentless outward composure isn't just a shiny new wrapper for a very old, very harmful habit. I argue that demanding we constantly power through our distress contains a structural contradiction, one that merely masks the psychological damage of emotional suppression under the guise of productivity.
Okay, let me lay out why I find this framework not just compelling, but frankly, incredibly necessary for anyone trying to operate in a high-stakes environment.
Go for it.
What we are looking at is a highly effective model for maintaining forward momentum when you hit the inevitable friction of daily life. The absolute brilliance of this material lies in its pragmatism. It introduces this concept of extreme compartmentalization.
The runes.
Yes, exactly. It asks us to treat a single day like a house with many separate rooms. Work is one room. Your evening with your family is another room. Your time at the gym is yet another.
Sure.
If a minor friction occurs, say your morning commute is a total disaster, or you get that vague, stressful text from your boss, this framework argues you must actively shut the door on that specific room.
Right, just slam it shut.
Well, yes. By demanding that we separate our feeling time from our decision time, this paradigm ensures that our emotions do not hijack our overarching goals. You don't let one broken light bulb lock all the doors in your house. It is fundamentally about preserving your agency.
Okay. And my primary concern is that treating the human psyche like an architectural floor plan is a flawed premise from the jump.
How so?
Because when we look closely at the text, it presents a jarring contradiction regarding what it actually means to be emotionally healthy. On one hand, the framework explicitly warns us against the dangers of bottling up our emotions.
Which is good advice.
It is. It paints this vivid cautionary picture of the ultimate consequence. The person who pushes down hurtful comments, smiles through the pain to keep the peace, and eventually suffers a total nervous breakdown, crying on the bathroom floor.
Right. It explicitly says not to do that.
But wait, in the exact same breath, this text glorifies the concept of being composed. And how does it define composure?
It defines it as...
It defines it as smiling and projecting calm on the outside while your heart is racing and your hands are shaking on the inside. It advocates for constantly growing a thick skin.
I contend that this is not emotional mastery at all. This is simply rebranding emotional suppression.
Okay, I think we have to start right there with the rooms analogy. Because while I hear your hesitation about the floor plan concept, I think it perfectly captures the physiological and psychological reality of emotional bleed.
Emotional bleed.
Yes. Let's go back to that bad morning. If you have a meeting that goes terribly, maybe your technology fails during that big presentation, and you walk out feeling completely incompetent, the source material uses a brilliant metaphor here. It says that carrying that negative emotion into the rest of your day is like wearing a dirty, wet jacket.
Right, the dirty, wet jacket metaphor.
Yes, and I'm sure anyone listening has experienced this. You spill coffee on your shirt at 8 a.m., and somehow that leads to you snapping at your partner at 8 p.m.
Sure, the mood carries over.
Exactly. The jacket is well and truly on. If you do not compartmentalize, you keep that heavy, uncomfortable, freezing jacket on. You wear it when you walk through your front door to see your kids. You let the negative, chaotic energy of one isolated failure bleed into and contaminate domains of your life that had absolutely nothing to do with the original event.
Right.
The instruction to shut the door on that room, to refuse to let the morning's failure dictate the evening's success, is what the text calls resilience. It's like building an emotional firewall. How is that not a universally beneficial strategy for navigating a chaotic world?
I hear what you're saying about the dirty jacket, but I actually come at it from a slightly different way. I question the psychological realism of that specific analogy.
Why? It makes perfect sense.
Because a dirty jacket is an external object. You can physically take it off your shoulders, hang it on a hook, and walk away. But human emotions are internal, biochemical realities. They do not recognize the artificial doorways or firewalls we try to construct in our prefrontal cortex.
Well, they don't have to recognize a doorway for you to choose to walk through it.
But if you experience a catastrophic failure in a morning presentation, your body has released a cascade of cortisol and adrenaline. Your sympathetic nervous system is highly activated.
But that biological activation does not require you to surrender your behavioral choices to it. You can be flooded with cortisol and still choose to speak calmly to your spouse.
True, behavioral control is possible, sure, but forcing yourself to instantly shake it off and perform perfectly in the next room completely invalidates the emotional processing required to actually regulate that nervous system.
I wouldn't say it invalidates it.
If you just slam the artificial door on the room where you felt incompetent, aren't you demanding a level of immediate psychological dissociation? You aren't processing the emotion. You are just abandoning it in that room to rot.
That's a bit dramatic.
And abandoned emotions, as literally any psychologist will tell you, do not just evaporate, they sit there in the dark, gathering compound interest, waiting for you to inevitably open the door again.
I see where you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on what the text is actually asking us to do. It is absolutely not advocating for dissociation or the permanent abandonment of the emotion.
It certainly sounds like it.
No. And I think this leads us directly into that definitional tension you raised earlier between composure and bottling up. I will be entirely honest. When I first read the instruction to smile while your hands are shaking, I had the exact same reaction as you. I thought, well, that is a recipe for a stomach ulcer.
Exactly. It's terrible advice on its face.
On its face, maybe. But when you look at the mechanism the text proposes, the distinction becomes incredibly clear. The text acknowledges that bottling up, hiding emotions inside, and never giving them a voice leads to that explosive breakdown in the bathroom. Composure, in the context of this framework, is not about pretending the emotion doesn't exist. It is about active, tactical management.
But how is it tactical management when the text literally describes composure as maintaining a social facade while your internal alarms are screaming? That is the exact physiological definition of suppressing a stress response.
Because it is maintaining a professional baseline while experiencing internal noise, yes. But the mechanism of action, the how, is entirely different. The text offers highly specific tools for this.
Like what?
It suggests that when your emotions spike, when that cortisol hits, you don't ignore it forever. Instead, you take a 5-second, deliberate breath. You actively use a phrase like, "Can we talk about this after the break?"
Okay, delaying the reaction.
Yes, that is the definition of composure here. It is delaying the reaction to avoid the sheer destructiveness of acting in the heat of the moment. Think about it like pulling the emergency brake on a train.
Right.
Exploding at a colleague because you are tired and feeling defensive, using extreme sweeping language like "you never support my ideas," is destructive. It burns professional bridges. Composure is giving yourself those 5 extra seconds to ensure the emotion does not become the driver of the car and crash your entire career. It's a tactical pause, not permanent suppression.
Okay. I will readily concede that avoiding a reactionary explosion in the heat of the moment is vital for professional and, frankly, personal survival.
Thank you.
Giving yourself a 5-second buffer to prevent saying something you will permanently regret is undeniably sound advice. Pulling the emergency brake makes sense.
Right.
But my contention lies in the sustained application of this composure. The text doesn't just present this as a rare break-in-case-of-emergency tactic. It presents it as a baseline state of being. It's a continuous, relentless demand to project calmness regardless of your internal reality.
And if we accept that this 5-second buffer works for an acute crisis, the question becomes how it applies to our broader lives. That continuous application is exactly what builds the overarching trait of resilience. It is what the text terms being relentless.
Which is exactly where the framework starts to show its cracks for me.
I don't see them as cracks at all. The text makes a profound observation here. Successful individuals still experience the exact same feelings of being lazy, annoyed, or utterly exhausted as anyone else.
Sure.
Their brains still whisper, you are too tired today, just do it tomorrow. The differentiator for success is not the magical absence of negative emotion. It is the execution of a small action anyway.
A small action.
Yes. If you feel terrible, but you commit to just 10 minutes of studying or 10 minutes of working on your side project, you are building a psychological muscle. You are sending a neurological signal to your brain that you can show up even when the motivation isn't there. You are, to use their phrase, powering through.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the long-term biological and psychological cost of constantly powering through those signals?
I mean, if it's only 10 minutes.
The framework assumes that feelings of exhaustion, annoyance, or lack of motivation are merely obstacles to be bypassed, like they are just annoying passengers messing with the radio. But from a psychological standpoint, those feelings are crucial data.
Data?
Yes. Think about the dashboard of a car. Exhaustion is the low fuel light. It is a signal that the organism requires rest to repair itself. Annoyance isn't just noise. It might be a flashing warning light that a personal boundary is being repeatedly crossed by a coworker.
Okay, but
if your default setting is to relentlessly override those dashboard warning lights with a small action just to prove your self-control, you are walking a very dangerous line toward chronic burnout. You are driving the car until the engine seizes.
But the framework is not demanding you work for 10 hours when your low fuel light is on. It is demanding 10 minutes. It is about preserving the habit architecture. It is keeping the goal alive in your nervous system.
It is the broader mentality behind it that worries me, especially when we look at how the text applies this relentlessness to external criticism.
You mean the internet trolls example?
Exactly. Look at the example it provides regarding unfair stereotypes. It discusses someone facing judgments from strangers on the internet, specifically mocking a content creator for having a foreign accent.
Right.
The text's proposed solution to this xenophobia is to grow a thick skin and rise above it. It tells the individual to accept the small pain, tell themselves their message is still helpful to others, and just keep executing.
Yes, exactly. Because fighting with anonymous trolls in the comment section of the internet is a massive drain on the driver's energy. It accomplishes absolutely nothing. Rising above it and focusing on the daily actions that actually build your future is the only rational, pragmatic path forward.
But doesn't that place an entirely unfair burden on the individual? It demands that the person being targeted by systemic, unfair stereotypes, like the idea that quiet people cannot be strong leaders, or that making a grammatical mistake in your second language means you lack intelligence, must absorb that negativity, process it entirely internally, and somehow instantly transform it into fuel for relentless action.
Well, they have to deal with it somehow.
But it demands a constant, superhuman thick skin rather than allowing for genuine, justified grievance. Sometimes anger at an unfair stereotype is the most appropriate, healthy response you can have.
By constantly demanding we rise above, the framework borders on toxic positivity.
Oh, toxic positivity, really?
Yes, it denies the individual the right to say, actually, this room is broken, the people in it are being unfair, and I am legitimately angry about it.
Look, for anyone listening who feels like they are constantly burning out, trying to power through unfairness, I can completely understand why the text's advice here might sound a bit harsh or even dismissive.
It is dismissive.
Using it as toxic positivity misreads the incredibly sophisticated mechanism the text offers for processing those very grievances. The text absolutely does not say, never feel the anger. It says, you must separate your feeling time from your decision time.
You're referring to the notebook strategy.
I am. The notebook strategy is perhaps the absolute strongest piece of evidence against your charge of emotional suppression. Let's look deeply at the specific example provided in the text.
Go ahead.
A content creator wants to quit their channel entirely because they are battling a stereotype in their own head. The fear that playful teachers are not respected. The fear is that only serious, stoic people are taken seriously in their field. That fear is very real, and the emotion attached to it is incredibly loud.
And in that moment, the feeling of vulnerability is entirely dictating the desire to quit the project.
Precisely. If the emotions are driving the car in that moment, the creator deletes their channel and walks away from their goal. But the framework offers a highly specific physical intervention. First, you give the emotions dedicated, bounded space. You open a physical notebook and you write down the raw fear. I am scared of this project because people will not respect my playful style.
You externalize it.
Yes, you externalize it. You get it out of the echoing chamber of your own head and onto a piece of paper. That is your dedicated feeling time.
And then the door to that feeling room closes.
Then you pivot to decision time. Now that the fear is on paper, you can look at the objective facts. What does the actual data say about audience engagement? What is the tangible financial risk? You make a 3-month execution plan based on the data, not the fear.
Right.
You give them a voice, they get their one vote, but you do not give them veto power over your life. Explain to me how that is toxic positivity. It is advanced emotional regulation. It's like closing the background apps on your phone to save battery. By putting the fear on paper, you free up the cognitive RAM required to actually make a rational decision. You acknowledge the fear of the stereotype, but you refuse to let it dictate your trajectory.
Okay, I will not argue with the neuroscience there. The notebook strategy is brilliant.
See?
Externalizing anxiety to reduce cognitive load is a proven psychological technique. When you are caught in an anxiety loop, your amygdala, your brain's primary threat detection center, is essentially blaring a fire alarm.
Exactly.
And when that alarm sounds, it drastically reduces the processing power of your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, planning part of your brain. The physical act of taking a pen, forming words, and writing on paper forces the brain to reboot that prefrontal cortex. It bridges the gap between feeling and logic. It is a very strong point in the text's favor.
Because it gives you the vital clarity to be decisive.
It does aid decisiveness. However,
There's the however.
I still maintain that the overarching narrative of the text leans too heavily on a rigid stoicism. Even with the genius of the notebook strategy, the persistent instruction is to immediately support that new decision with relentless action and strictly no more thinking.
Which is how you execute a plan.
But it assumes that once the 3-month plan is set, the emotional friction just vanishes or simply becomes background static to be ignored. It treats the complex human operating system a bit too much like a software program that just needs a quick debug before running the execution script.
I don't think it's saying that at all.
We are not robots. And despite the text's frequent assurances that following this method prevents us from becoming them, the actual instructions demand a remarkably robotic consistency.
But the text explicitly defines what it means to avoid becoming a robot. It means becoming a leader in your own life. Think about how a good CEO operates. A good leader absolutely listens to their team. In this analogy, the emotions. They hear the concerns, they validate the risks, but the leader ultimately has to make the tough call to keep the enterprise moving forward.
Right, but
If you stop the car, pull over and renegotiate the route every single time the passenger gets nervous about a cloud in the sky, you will never reach your destination.
But to use your own analogy, if you ignore the passenger screaming that the engine is literally smoking because you are too relentlessly focused on the map, the car will eventually catch fire.
That's a bit extreme.
That is the razor's edge we are really debating here. The text inherently assumes that the long-term goals are always righteous and that the immediate emotions are always irrational distractions. But sometimes the emotions, the deep exhaustion, the profound hurt from an interaction, the legitimate frustration with systemic stereotypes, are the most accurate compass we have. Sometimes the emotion is telling you that you are driving to the wrong destination entirely.
Which perfectly brings us back to the ultimate utility of this framework. Treating emotions as passengers rather than drivers provides a tangible, actionable roadmap for anyone trying to build resilience in a world that honestly doesn't care about their feelings.
Fair enough.
Whether it is overcoming the paralysis of a bad morning by shutting the door on that room, avoiding the career suicide of exploding in the heat of the moment by taking a 5-second breath, or using a physical notebook to separate raw fear from factual decision-making, the framework offers a methodology for productivity that actually honors human fallibility.
By demanding we ignore it.
No, by accepting it. It fully accepts that we will feel lazy, we will feel profoundly hurt, and we will feel terrified. But it empowers us by insisting that our daily actions, not our transient feelings, are what dictate our future.
And while I absolutely agree that avoiding impulsive reactions and using tools like the notebook to externalize our fears are highly effective methods for gaining clarity, we must remain vigilant about the hidden costs of this methodology.
The hidden costs.
Yes. A framework that demands constant outward composure, that asks us to perpetually shake off systemic unfairness or deep personal distress in the name of relentless forward motion, risk commodifying our humanity. We must be incredibly careful not to treat our own internal lives, our own biochemical realities, as mere obstacles to productivity.
Well, there is undoubtedly a profound complexity in balancing authentic emotional experience with the hard, often uncompromising necessity of achieving our long-term goals. The tension between feeling deeply and acting decisively is perhaps the defining challenge of personal and professional growth.
It absolutely is, and the source material, despite my reservations about its demands, certainly provides a rich, albeit challenging lens through which to examine that exact tension.
It gives us all something significant to evaluate. It invites us to look closely at our own reactions, to examine the metaphorical rooms we build in our minds, and to ask ourselves a very difficult, very necessary question. In the journey of our own lives, who exactly is driving the car? We will leave that for you to consider.